What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the first ever Everyday Sens podcast live stream. So we welcome everyone who is in the chat. Just light it up, everything you want to talk about. We're obviously going to talk about the elephant in the room and Alex DeBrincat. But first, just Brennan, how are you doing today on this Friday, June 9th? Just things are heating up for the Ottawa Senators in the offseason here.
Well, we've just gotten our entire plan thrown for a circle for a loop here because a new article just dropped 10 minutes ago that threw us off here 5 minutes before we were about to start recording. So to everybody in the chat, welcome. This is exciting. It's kind of a test stream for us. I mean, we're going to see how some things work and what's going on, but we're definitely planning to do this more. So yeah, thanks for joining us, and we've got a lot to talk about.
Yeah, and again, look, we're testing out the live stream. We think it'll be good. It's essentially the same as we normally do. We'll have people in the chat. We've got you guys watching live over on the YouTube. This will be available on audio afterwards. But like we mentioned, it's all about Alex DeBrincat today. And like Brennan said, we had a wrench thrown in right before we went live. Steve Warren with the Hockey News released something that kind of contradicts absolutely everything we've been led to believe in the last 4 days concerning Alex DeBrincat's future. But first, before we get into that angle of it, let's just kind of attack the original reports, right? We haven't really had a chance to break it down. I know that last week, 2 episodes ago, we talked about everything with DeBrincat, not knowing anything really about decisions. And then it came out that he was not ready to commit long-term at this point. We had Bruce Garriock on it. Pierre LeBrun was on it. Elliot Friedman was on it. It was a pretty confirmed that he wasn't ready yet. And I want to emphasize yet because of what Steve Warren has just put out. But first, I'll just kind of lay this out in the way it went. If anyone had missed it for some reason, Alex DeBrincat is not ready to sign long-term as of right now, citing ownership as a potential issue. We had other insiders speculating about his fit on the team. And it was just a bit of a crazy couple days for Sens fans, right? We got mock trades out there everywhere. We've got people not enjoying DeBrincat necessarily for taking things for granted, all that. Brendan, before we get into everything, and we have to factor in, obviously, Steve Warren now, what were your initial thoughts just when you read that DeBrincat doesn't want to stay is basically what the reports were saying?
Well, I was quite upset, as you could see by my Twitter feed, because I just wanted this guy to sign. I think over the last few days, I know I've seen a lot of coping, and that's not to say that people aren't right to cope, but Alex DeBrincat is not a bad player. Like, there's been a lot of, kind of comparing his stats and saying, well, he's not very important to the team, and they can just easily replace him and find whatever. And there are perks to trading him, right? You'd have the cap space, you'd be able to upgrade the depth. But, like, we're talking about a 2-time 40 goal scorer who he's not a bad player. 66 points, and I tweeted this too. Jason Spezza was the last Sens forward to hit even 66 points since 2012, other than Brady Tkachuk last year, who had 67. So I understand, trying to move past DeBrincat already, but I think we really just have to understand, even the initial report that started all this said at this time, he's not ready to commit long-term, but that's no different than saying because of ownership, he's not ready to commit long-term, right? So until this ownership thing is resolved, and I know that does sound like a bit of a cop-out for him because, now we've seen his list of preferred teams, which we'll get into in a bit, and a lot of it is these sunny places and his hometown and all that. But again, I think that's just standard to submit that list of teams. It doesn't necessarily mean he wants out. And yeah, we got to get into this article by Steve Warren because, I mean, it's a doozy. Like, this is kind of just a bomb dropped on us here. So if you want to read off like some stuff here, and we'll dive right into it because it's conflicting with everything else.
Yeah, so first, the title of the article, and it was posted 49 minutes ago, I guess, just kind of made the rounds on Twitter recently. It's Steve Warren at the Hockey News, says source, and then, quote, DeBrincat would like to stay, likes the coach a lot, and loves the team, end quote. Then further goes on to explain, the source says, he likes the coach a lot and loves the team. I think he is worried that with all the guys making big money, he may not be in their plans, but was excited to play with a healthy Josh Norris. That's a good quote to me. We've all thought the same thing. It's kind of comforting, I guess, to know that DeBrincat felt the same. The source, I guess, according to Steve Warren, is close to his family, or I'm not going to say part of his family, but close to DeBrincat. And from what we know, DeBrincat's kept a pretty closed circle as of right now. Like, I don't know if much has leaked from his camp. Everything that's leaked I say leaked, but it was Pierre Dorion speaking about it, seems to be from the Sens side. Another thing from the source at the Hockey News says he would like to stay, but he also knows this is the one contract that needs to have term in it, like a Cole Caulfield. You know, that's a good point too. I think I'm guilty of it. A lot of us have compared DeBrincat to Stützle and Kachuk last season and saying he can't make more than them, doesn't make sense. But again, we have to factor in that Kachuk and Stützle came off their entry level deals when they signed those extensions. So obviously it was going to come at a cheaper price tag. So that's something that obviously DeBrincat is aware of and is factoring in. So Brennan, like again, like you mentioned, threw everything out the window. I still have a bunch of questions we can get into about DeBrincat, but knowing this, like, what does this change for you? Does this make you more optimistic that it might get something done? Like, to me, it does. I'm more optimistic now that DeBrincat will end up staying because, again, just before you go, Pierre Dorion and the Sens have also made zero indication that they want to move him. It was just that he was exploring his options. And again, Locked On Senators interviewed Dorion, and he said, we're going to start looking at every option while we wait for his decision or while we talk about it because they have to. So it wasn't really news when that broke the other day. So what does this Steve Warren article say to you? Does it make you more confident, less confident, more of a whirlwind about what's going on?
Definitely. I mean, it makes me more confident for sure, just because, I mean, if he says it's close to the DeBrincat family, and we were talking about this before, but I wouldn't go public with this source kind of conflicting what the top insiders and Elliot Friedman and Bruce covering the Sens and all these other people have said if I wasn't confident in that source. So with Steve, I mean, he's taken a bit of a risk by going public with this because you can see his tweet is already blown up with that article and with the headline. And so if he's wrong, it's going to be kind of a, it's a risk, right? That's just what you do when you go live with a source. So, it does make me more optimistic and it makes me a bit happier because I would like to keep him as we discussed. There is some really good quotes in there. I know the he likes the coach a lot is one that I find interesting because the whole thing was that it seemed like he didn't like the system based on what he was saying. What it kind of says to me is that we don't know anything behind the scenes. Like it's just a matter of the team is saying one thing, the agent's saying one thing. Like Kevin in the chat recently said, they're negotiating through the media, and it's just that's something that Pierre Dorion never used to do, and now it is very much that way, right? Um, Again, though, it's just standard to submit your list of teams. It's standard to explore your options. I don't think, I think it was overblown that everybody got so upset about the fact that Dorion was, potentially exploring his options on the market, right? Of course, you're going to do that. Like the draft is coming up. You might want to get a first round pick, might want to flip it, might want to make a hockey trade, before this draft. And that makes sense. But I don't know that we're even going to have a timeline on DeBrincat before then. So we can go back to the idea of a 1-year deal in that case, right? And people are opposed to this, but if you sign him on a 1-year deal, and with this article now, that opens up a lot more to me personally, because I think if he actually feels like he'd be willing to re-sign in Ottawa, if you can sign him on a 1-year deal and maybe you get him at 15% off through arbitration, which is like 7.85 million next year, and then maybe you add somewhere else in the lineup, right? If the Sens are a playoff team, which they should be, because if they're not, everybody should get fired. If they're a playoff team at the deadline, do you not think he's going to be inclined to resign if he's already open to it right now? Because I'd feel pretty positive about that. Like that's a confident thing if this article is accurate. So yeah, exactly. Go ahead. Yeah,
I definitely think so, and that's the part that is so strange. Is like everything on paper makes so much sense for DeBrincat to stay, right? And I'm just looking at all my questions now, and they're all like all geared towards not hating on him, but there's an angle I was taking, right? And it was just I was kind of you mentioned the copium, and I was definitely part of that, just because like I was trying to spin it in a positive light. Like this isn't the end of the world. This is a very unique situation for the Sens, and they're trying to compete, but they also got to get rid of this asset. It was an asset that didn't perform as well as we thought, but will probably do much better next season wherever he is. So there's a lot of that. You're right. This article changes things. And look, I don't know Steve Warren personally. I don't think many of us do. No one's going to question his journalistic integrity. Like he's writing for the Hockey News. That's a big publication. He's going to put that out if it's something. When it's one source, I know that it's different, right? Because if it's one source, like you have to be sure that it's, or I shouldn't even be sure, but like since it's one source, even what they're saying doesn't mean it's true. But if they're close to the situation, you can kind of bank on what they're saying, right? Like it's important. And what's important too is that it kind of, we were talking earlier before we went live about, it doesn't necessarily contradict everything, but it spins it differently, right? Because everything before, like we mentioned, was just due diligence. It was the Sens exploring the trade market. DeBrincat's not ready to sign yet because he's not sure about ownership. None of that is surprising, I would say. Maybe a bit disappointing that they haven't figured something out yet. But again, like, you're right. This kind of took us for a ride here. Like, this is a much different tone than I was expecting to talk about DeBrincat, and I'm glad we caught this before we went live. But uh, look, I'm just gonna surf through and see the initial reaction to Steve Warren's article here. But for now, I'll let you go with here with Justin Mercier, or Mercier if I'm mispronouncing that. What's a realistic deal here for DeBrincat? Is it 3 times 8.15? But Justin, I'll just mention, like, in the article, the source says that DeBrincat knows this is a long-term deal he's got to sign here based on where he is in his career. So I would imagine 3 years has to be off the table. I don't think that's going to happen. But what do you think about maybe that price tag if you're DeBrincat?
Well, the price tag is arguably the most interesting aspect of this because for me, I've said, and I've kind of went bold with it, and I wrote an article, free article on everydaysens.com where I actually broke down everything behind DeBrincat's, the factors behind a down season, like what happened this year, why the trend suggests he's going to return to form as a 40 goal scorer or 30, 35, whatever it is, moving forward. And that's why I feel it would be a mistake to move him. I also did a full salary cap projection, which I featured, like I put numbers for Jacob Chikrin and Jake Sanderson. And like I factored all this in. And what's important to note is the NHL is expected to get up to 92 million, I believe it is, as a salary cap by 2025, which is soon. Like it's going to jump. And so while right now signing DeBrincat to 8.5 million seems like a lot, and it seems like it automatically, I've seen this so many times, and it's a little frustrating, and I get it, but I've seen a lot where people say, okay, if you sign DeBrincat to 8.5, you automatically lose Jacob Chikrin, or you can't sign Jake Sanderson long term. It's like I've done the math and it is possible. You can read the article for free right now. It's very possible. It'll be tight because that's how pro sports work, right? It's going to be tight from a salary cap standpoint. Because like I ended up factoring out to around 90 million after doing all of the projections, and that's close to the cap for sure, but that's how it's going to be. And I added that, like, if a Shane Pinto or somebody prices himself out of Ottawa's lineup, that would suck. You'd hate to lose him if, in his prime after a bridge deal or something, you can't re-sign him. But at the same time, like, you have to make your priorities, right? You have to choose who you're going to keep and who you're not. And I think that, if DeBrincat can be a 70-point guy, I'm going to take him over a potential 40 or 50-point guy. That just is logical, right? Like, it makes sense. So I know there are varying opinions on the number, but I will say it's mathematically possible to sign DeBrincat for 8 years and keep the entire core, which includes Sanderson and Chikrin, intact. And you have to realize too, Claude Giroux is like, he's not going to get 6.5 million again when his contract expires, right? He's probably going to sign for cheap like Spezza did. Like he's going to probably go 2 or 3 million, maybe even less at 38 years old, right? If he's even still playing. So that's going to be a huge reduction. You've got 4+ million coming off the books in dead cap next year. Like the space will open. I know it's hard to see and it's hard to accept, but the space will open. I promise you. So yeah, I mean, I'm willing to go 8 to 9 million. I don't care if he's signed for more than Stützle and Kachuk. That doesn't bother me one bit. The core is signed. Do what you have to do to keep them, but over 9 million is kind of where I draw the line personally.
Well, yeah, I draw the line there, but again, like you mentioned, 2 years beyond this is okay, and we're all right 2 years beyond this cap wise, especially given Stützle, Kachuk, and Norris's deals. Like no one's above 8.3 at this point, which is awesome. That's huge. The problem has always been and will be next season, and like we mentioned, it's you got to make playoffs next year. So next year's the challenge, and we were emphasizing next year because, like you mentioned, if they don't make playoffs, heads are going to roll. Like people are going to get fired because, like, again, we'll get into this a bit later maybe, but ownership's taking a long time. Dorion and probably DJ, depending on what ownership wants, are probably going to be back to start next year. But like I mentioned, I had so many questions lined up just in the event that DeBrincat was not, going to stay and wanted to go. And I will still kick some of them to you. Just again, nothing contradicting to what Steve Warren said, but let's go as if the trade is going to happen or whatever. And we have talked about it.
Still very possible, by the way. Like it
for
still
sure,
very well could happen.
Of course it is, right? And again, we'll get into him submitting lists of teams because I know you mentioned like it's normal procedure. I don't think it is at all, especially if you don't have a no move clause. He doesn't have a contract right now. He they can send him wherever they want. But like to me, it's like it's yeah. So we got the quote there on everyone here is watching on YouTube right now. If we're live, for you to read there, and the healthy Josh Norris thing that is interesting. So I am going to mention here. Look, we have talked a lot about how the team needs to get better at 5-on-5, and they were not good enough at 5-on-5 last year. Everyone outside of the top line had poor numbers at 5-on-5, DeBrincat included. So next year he's off the team, let's say, okay, and you get Josh Norris back. To me, you swap those two out on the power play, should just be a wash. I think DeBrincat brought a value to the power play. I think Norris, we've seen it with this group. He was good on the power play 2 years ago. It's where he scored a ton of his goals. So if DeBrincat wasn't great at 5-on-5, you're kind of banking on him turning it around at 5-on-5 and being part of this better even strength team. It's not even a question. It's just kind of a statement. It's like I'm doing the spin here. I'm spinning it up like they would be okay in the sense that they have options to improve the team at 5-on-5. Now, this will lead into a question. Let's say last summer the Sens don't get DeBrincat, okay, and they don't acquire a top six guy, and they come into this summer, and that's the priority, to acquire a top talent, top six guy that can play with them. If DeBrincat had been traded from Chicago to another team and was in this similar situation but away from Ottawa, would you still be as antsy to get him as you were last summer, based on the season he just had in wherever it was, not Chicago, like a competitive team like a Buffalo or Detroit, let's say, or something that just missed the playoffs, like a Pittsburgh, or you know what I'm saying? Like around that kind of tier that Ottawa was in this year, and he put up 27 goals, 66 points, not good at even strength, didn't play with top guys very often, but had this exact season but somewhere else, and the Sens were in the market for a top line guy, would you be all over him? Because I don't even know the answer for myself.
Well, the price of some of these mock trades I'm seeing are absolutely, because people are talking like we can get him for a 4th round pick right now. Like I'm getting just destroyed for every mock trade I propose. I'm out here doing like just trying to reduce the price. But it just seems like people are really basing everything on this past season. And I understand, like I won't like sugarcoat it. He had a worse season than he ever did in Chicago. So yeah, if I was on the market and I looked at him, I would consider him more of like a 70-point player, 30 goal, 70-point player. Whereas last year when we got him, I saw him as a 40 goal, 80-point player. Like that was kind of more what I was expecting. But again, and I just keep preaching this, is the trends all say he's going to return to form. And I am so scared that if they trade him, and you know what, I'm almost rooting for him a little bit. If they trade him, he's gonna go somewhere and light it up. Like if he goes to Detroit, a division rival, he's gonna go there and play with Larkin. He's gonna score 40 freaking goals, and people are gonna be upset about it, and it's just gonna suck. So I can see that happening. He had one other down year in his career where he scored less goals and points. He had 18 goals that year, and the next year after that, he scored, I believe it was 32 and 52 games, I think is what it was. So, and he was over a point per game that year. So, like, if we're looking at the past trends, he should rebound to where he was. And we've talked about it as well, how he scored less goals than expected for only the second time in his career. And that was the other season that I just talked about. That's probably not going to happen again. Like, more often than not, he scored 9 more goals than expected in every other season. So, is he really going to stick at that kind of bad luck? And I know he missed a lot of open nets, and that's unfortunate, but is he really going to stick at that when every other year in his career except one, he's proven to be an elite sniper? Like, he doesn't miss those chances. So whatever it was this year, I understand that his value went down, but that's why I say I'd be fine with keeping him on a 1-year deal. I have no problem with that, because if we're going to sell him at a low, if the Stars are not going to give us Logan Stankoven, I don't want to even talk to them. I want to hang up the phone. I'm not taking him for Mason Marchment and a 4th round pick. Get out of here. Like, I'm not doing that. This guy has a lot of value, and he's a much better player than we saw last year. And it's going to haunt them if they trade him at a low right now. I promise you it's going to haunt them. And I think Dorian's smart enough, though, not to. I really think he'd be fine with holding on to him if there's not a deal he likes, which is another quote we actually saw earlier today.
I've been hard on Dorian. I've mentioned this on Twitter. I have ripped him actually on this podcast in the last couple months. Just his end of season media I didn't like, and all that. I liked the rounds he did recently. I think it was good given his situation with new ownership. He doesn't really know. He probably knows more than we do about job security and everything. But I'll give him credit. in the sense that this was like, I'll give him maybe not credit, but I won't discredit him for making this trade in the first place. I've seen you mentioned the storm on Twitter about all the different takes and everything. And first of all, it's great that there's so many different angles you can take about this. It's new in Ottawa where it's not, I'm thinking back to the Brady Kachuk contract. And everyone was saying, this is all on the team, and none of it was against Brady for holding out. And I think if that happened now, 3 years later, it'd be a much different story. But um, for a guy like DeBrincat, I don't see how this is on Pierre Dorion necessarily. There are a lot of similarities, I would say, to the way this is starting to unfold to, like I mentioned, to Brady Kachuk's contract holdout. But when you think about it, it was 2 years ago that happened. So much different in terms of where the team is, where they're looking to go, who's signed here. But I'll say this immediate reaction reading that Steve Warren article makes me more like makes me feel like more like DeBrincat actually wants to stay. And I know it's maybe insanely recency bias, but it's just another angle that we haven't really considered. Like all the time we were considering, oh, this guy doesn't want to be here. He wants to go somewhere warm or he wants to go home. But yeah, like to me, that's a such a different angle, and it's exciting. It's exciting that this is a possibility because I would say that most Sens fans want to keep him. I would be okay saying that. I'd be pretty confident saying that. Not on a 1-year deal. I don't think people are comfortable doing, but I would be. I'd be good with arbitration because if you do arbitration, that's $1.5 million in savings that you wouldn't probably have on a long-term deal. So next year would be good, but yeah, like I don't know that one about him being on a different team. If you would still be as interested, that was kind of my big one. I'm just trying to look like what can I ask that isn't out of context now based on what we know. Like, I guess, are you confident enough? Let's say they lose him, like a Batherson and a Joseph are two other forwards that I think need bounce back years, along with the addition of Norris, who just needs a bounce back year health wise. If it was just those three and like you supplement goaltending or whatever with DeBrincat's money, like they're probably a worse team, but I think they're maybe more deep, like they're deeper than people would maybe give them credit for, if that makes sense. Like that's the angle I was taking going into this, but now that the Steve Warren thing came out, I don't know what to think. But he did mention the draft as a strange timeline for the Sens if he wants to stay. And Justin, I just saw your comment there. We will get into the teams. I'll get Brennan to answer this first, and then we'll kind of bring up some of the teams that were reported that he would want to go to. So Brennan, what do you think about just if he's off the team? Just give a outlook of how the depth looks and how the roster shakes out, just without any other trades.
Well, without any other trades, like without like you mean by the
Let,
draft if they traded them or
let's
like
say they get a pick back or something and then make the pick. Like I don't know. That's kind of my
yeah, see, I
angle.
wouldn't like that because I know the depth. I get that like it's gonna help them in the other areas of the lineup, but to me, I think DeBrincat is more important than these depth guys or even a goalie. I mean, it depends. It's all dependent because it depends who you get. Like if they were to trade DeBrincat and then sign, I don't know, like Corpusalo is a name. I know he's kind of iffy, but just someone who say he had another good season like he did this year, Corpusalo, and they signed him. Like next summer, you're probably thinking that's worth it because you just signed a good goalie who maybe helped you to the playoffs, right? It's so dependent though, and that's why it's hard to even be mad at Dorian or anybody because even if they trade DeBrincat, if they go out and they actually use his money to sign a quality player or even a Connor Brown, and then they sign somebody like a depth player like a Jesper Fost, okay, the lineup looks a whole lot different now, and maybe those two guys can supplement what DeBrincat was providing while also providing some other things, some other intangibles, and then you could even probably have leftover money after that. So I know there are two sides to it. And I want to just touch on what Frank McDougall commented, which is that basically teams like the Leafs who have a lot of stars signed as their core, they don't succeed in the playoffs. And like because lineups are balanced. And I totally see what you're saying. And I'm trying to it's kind of hard to like explain it, but if you look at Florida, for example, you say the lineup is balanced, and it certainly is. They have a very balanced lineup, but like their forward group is balanced because they have Nick Cousins playing on the second line. And Nick Cousins scored 27 points, 9 goals in 79 games this year. Like that's not a top six forward. They've just reshuffled their lines to adapt for it. Like Ottawa can do that too, right? They could put Batherson on the third line and put Joseph on the second line and now it looks the same. It's just they need Joseph to perform like he did initially. I'm just trying to say, and you look at Vegas. I'll let you go in a sec, Jack. I know you're about to add to
No, no.
this. I'm going on a tangent here because if you look at Vegas, Vegas has Brett Howden on their second line. Brett Howden scored 13 points in 54 games this year. My point is that you can basically put these guys who don't produce a lot of points in, like, you can make the lineup balanced with DeBrincat in it. It's not a matter of necessarily signing better depth players. If Zach Ostapchuk comes in and he's a quality bottom six player, he's a quality third line player, you add Ridley Gregg to the mix, you could easily have like Kachuk, Stützle, Giroux, DeBrincat, Norris, Joseph, or Ostapchuk or Gregg. And then on the third line, you could have Pinto, Batherson, and somebody else. Like, that's a great top nine. That's a great top nine, even though maybe that second line spot is occupied by someone who isn't ideal based on their point production. It doesn't have to be, because in the playoffs, if you go through every lineup, I could keep doing this. The Hurricanes have Jack Drury in their top six. They have Stefan Noesen on their first line. They have Mackenzie McEachern, who I've never even heard of in my life, on their third line, and they went to the conference finals. So it's really just about finding quality players who are cost effective, yes. But I think that if you reshuffle the group, because the Leafs, it's very top six heavy, and in their bottom six is kind of lacking. If you reshuffle it and you find players who fit with other players, you can make it work. Like, Nick Cousins is not a top six player. He's a fourth line player, but he's on the second line of a Stanley Cup finalist team, right? So I think it just depends how you look at it. It kind of depends how you allocate the money and how you find cost effective options. And what goes with that too is drafting, because you have to keep drafting, you have to keep finding players, which is why I wouldn't be opposed if they do trade DeBrincat to bring in, a second or third round pick with it, just kind of stock up, because they have nothing in this draft, so they're kind of in a rough spot there.
So yeah, I just wanted to, you mentioned Florida, and I think that's a good kind of maybe blueprint. Immediately to my mind, Barkov makes 10, Kachuk makes 9.5. I think Reinhardt makes 6 something, maybe 7.
They have a lot of contracts coming up too, a lot of expiring deals.
Yeah, like they're kind of at the end there. Sam Bennett makes 4.4. Like they've got great deals, but they found diamonds in the rough a little bit, right? And I think Dallas is a good example of high salaries for a lot of different guys being effective, right? You've got Robertson at 8 something, Hintz at 8 something, Seguin at 9, Ben at 9. Like, that's what the model the Sens are going after. And it's not that they're, looking at the stars and being like, yeah, well, we're doing that. But we talked about it when we previewed the Final Four. I mentioned Dallas as like a good blueprint for next season, being you've got older guys making a lot of money. Giroux's your Pavelski, making cheaper than he's probably worth, but he's older, so it's okay. Ben and Seguin can, are veterans that have been around a long time. Like, but then a Wyatt Johnson is coming in, and like a Stankoven next year for them probably. Like, that's what the Sens need. They need an entry level guy who can come in and be impactful for the forwards in the top 9, because Pinto will be off his entry level deal. He was that guy this year. So yeah, like, I like the Florida comparison too, though. It's just like you can compete with serviceable depth, and I think Batherson is a good contract for that, right? Batherson's making 4.9, essentially 5. Like, those are guys that you need to have, obviously, but you also have to give your top players their due. And I think that point that in Steve Warren's article about the big guy, that all the other guys making big money, and big was in brackets, so I'm assuming that was a bit of an ad lib there from Steve, and maybe just an alluded to comment or whatever. But it's a fair, worry if you're DeBrincat, being like, all these guys got so much money. If they're pinching pennies with me in contract negotiations, that would be unfortunate for DeBrincat, because I know you're loyal to Norris. I think Norris is a good blueprint a little bit, just because he didn't really play this year. So we don't know if he's worth more or less than what he's getting. But if I'm DeBrincat and like Norris is getting 8 and I've barely seen this guy play, I would absolutely be like, am I really valued? And whether you agree with that or not, that's kind of the probably the angle that he's taking based on what Steve Warren just told us. So Justin, we will get to your question just about the list of teams that he had reportedly submitted. And there's a common denominator here, folks. It's warm and no state tax. We got Vegas and Florida, the 2 finalists right now, and then Dallas, Nashville, and then he is from the Michigan area. I believe he might even be from very close to Detroit. So those are Alex DeBrincat's reported submitted teams. I don't know if there's more. than that. I think St. Louis was kind of mentioned. So somewhere in the Central. Obviously, there's a few teams here from the Central Division. So we were planning on just going through these teams and kind of picking what we would want from each of them. I know people have linked the 9th overall pick with Detroit, and that would kind of just be like recouping some assets. It's just like you got rid of a second round pick if you don't get anything else back. I don't know, man. I don't know. Like Florida is interesting depending what happens. Like if they win the cup, they're gonna have a lot of cap casualties regardless. I think Vegas too. There's those two teams are I'm a little less enticed by. Dallas, I am. Nashville could be really interesting with UC Saros potentially being part of it. Like with these 5 teams, what are you thinking? And like who do you want the most out of any of these 5 teams? Like who makes most sense for a trade for you?
Well, I actually do have a list for all 5 teams, and I'll tell you right off the bat that this is why I didn't even really get excited about the opportunity for a trade, because I don't like 90% of the assets on these teams. Like I had a hard time, and I'm being generous with the assets I do like in these lists, and I'll read them off. It's not too long because again, I don't really like a whole lot. So Detroit and Nashville are the longest list for me. Now I tweeted out that to me a good DeBrincat trade would be 3 assets, which is basically a middle 6 young forward, which is basically like a replacement for him. Now, it's complicated because you could easily kind of not easily, but you could try to find a middle 6 forward on the market like Connor Brown, like we talked about. So it doesn't necessarily have to be in a trade. If you wanted to just like if you traded for the 9th overall pick from Detroit and then you added the prospect in or something, people would probably be fine with that. Maybe you flip that 9th pick for a different player. It's very complex. But anyway, I'll go through. So for Detroit, they've got the 9th and 17th pick, both of them. So either of those would obviously be valuable to the Sens. Again, Dorian said, or a source said to somebody, I think it was Friedman. Yeah, it was Friedman that Dorian wants pieces that will help the roster right now. So it's not about futures anymore. And Pierre recognizes that because it's his job on the line now. So Detroit, like they've got the 9th and 17th. They've got Dominic Kubalik, could make sense because he's probably going to be a cost-effective middle 6, 50-point guy. They've got like Zadina, they've got Sebastian Casa, they've got like Carter Mazer, Elmer Soderblom, Michael Rasmussen, Andrew Kopp, who God help us all. I'm so tired of talking about Andrew Kopp. That guy makes too much money, and I'm not really interested, but I know he's been a main discussion piece for Detroit. And then Jonathan Berggren is actually one of my favorite from them. He's a depth guy. But again, none of that stuff really like stands out to me. It doesn't pop off the page other than the 9th pick maybe. And if they traded for the 9th pick, it is just recouping assets. And then it's on Dorian to flip that for somebody of use because I just don't see a scenario where drafting a player at 9th overall really helps the team in their current contention window. Nashville is UC Saros, and that's my favorite one. UC Saros is like I put him in the thumbnail because I would give up a whole lot for UC Saros. I really like this guy. He arguably I think is the best goalie in the league. He's damn close if he's not number 1. And they have Askarov too, Yaroslav Askarov. So you could really try and fetch a goalie from them for the future, and that's something that Otto still needs to do and find. They also have like Colton Sissons, Philip Tomasino, UC Parsonen, Cody Glass, Joachim Kamel, and a million first-round picks and second-round picks. So Nashville, I think, is a good partner. I think Detroit's a good partner. Vegas, Florida, and Dallas are all kind of thin. They don't really have a lot that would be of serious value that could help the roster out. So again, for me, unless they're offering a package of the players I just listed, I'm not overly interested in trading him right now because I don't want to hear we'll give you the 20th pick in the draft, or from Florida we'll give you like whatever they have. I guess they might have Montreal's pick or something. I cannot remember what they have, but if they offered me the 20th pick in the draft, for example, and then added in a prospect, I'm like, no, we're just going to sign him to a 1-year deal. Maybe he'll re-sign with us, or maybe he'll raise his value by the deadline. Because as we've said, it's almost certain to me that he is going to score more goals and not suffer the same missed nets and posts and all that again next year. I don't think it'll happen. He'll be playing with the Josh Norris. At worst, at the deadline, he doesn't want to stay. Like I can almost guarantee his value is going to be higher. And teams like they traded the 1st-round pick for Ben Sherratt, who is just not a good defenseman, and that happened. Like you can get a haul at the deadline. I know people are scarred by Mark Stone, but it can happen, and I'd be willing to just keep DeBrincat at that point, unless I'm getting a UC Saros or like the 9th pick and 3 other pieces to improve the roster. Because I don't think you should sell him at a low. I think that's the worst thing possible. And I mean these teams just don't have a lot of pieces.
I agree, and that's kind of goes to what I said. Like, even if he submits this list of teams, he doesn't have to be traded there. This is just more of a, I guess, doing right by the player. But again, like Dorian's going to look for the best possible deal, and it was also reported today that or not reported, maybe I think it was Elliot Friedman on his podcast just mentioned they're looking for a roster players in return, which makes sense. And I think he also mentioned if they go for picks, they will look to flip them for roster players, which is what we've been talking about. I'm going back to the Steve Warren quote from his source about he likes the coach a lot and loves the team. I think he is worried that with all the guys making money, he may not be in their plans, but was excited to play with a healthy Josh Norris. That one is a dagger to the heart. Um, and I know Steve points it out that it's was excited to play with him. I'm not going to read too much into that. You know, if he says is excited to play with Josh Norris, we'd all be like, oh, he's staying. But that me too. Like I think we were all excited to see them for an extended period of time at least. Not that they necessarily work on paper. Like I don't look at both of their play styles and be like, yeah, these guys are perfect for each other. But like DeBrincat showed, he's got a playmaking side to him that
Hey,
we
buddy, career
maybe
high in assists.
that's what I was just gonna say. Like we didn't give him credit maybe for his playmaking ability this season. Obviously Shane Pinto gets 20 goals. Like that's partly because of DeBrincat, right? Shane Pinto had more even strength goals than DeBrincat because DeBrincat was dishing. That could be an angle too. Like there's so many different angles to take about this thing. There's so many different opinions on it. I love it. First of all, I love that we have something to talk about, like that isn't ownership speculation, which again we will get into in a little bit here just before we wrap up. But again, I agree. Saros would be game changing. He would be the best player in the trade, hands down. And I love DeBrincat. I think DeBrincat's a great player. But any other deal that you mentioned, DeBrincat is likely the best player leaving. So again, the Sens get worse by trading him. It's just I kind of alluded to this earlier. It's like the problem the Sens need to address with their forward group, even if DeBrincat stays, is 5v5 scoring, which again coincides with depth. But a big part of the 5v5 offense is DeBrincat, and he needs to bounce back. So again, that's a big if. Like, what if he doesn't click with Josh Norris next year, and he's got a long-term tag to him now? Like, again, I know you would be sticking by your guys, and you're not gonna throw it out the window, but it's like, and I'm in your camp. I'm in your boat that he will bounce back next season wherever he is. But it's still a big if. It's like it's probably the best gamble out there in terms of 5-on-5 scoring, but it's not a guarantee. Like it's not like he did it last season and it was no power play execution or something like that. Like the 5-on-5 has to be better. So yeah, man, I don't know. Like it's the gamble with trades and listen, if anyone in the chat right now just feels like I don't know, maybe feels like Dorion shouldn't have made this trade, because from my perspective last year, about like 11 months ago when the trade was made, it was a home run. I didn't see one Sens fan being like, this is a bad idea. So anyone right now who's saying Dorion was dumb to make that trade, I think is being hypocritical, because at the time, for months, we were calling for them to make a move, go for a big name in the summer, and they did it. So I don't see how this can be spun as a bad trade necessarily, even with this situation. We knew this was going to come the longer it went without him getting an extension this season. So yeah, like I don't really have a question. It's just like, this is just such a strange scenario, but it's fascinating to me because I called it a career defining trade or signing or whatever, career defining saga, let's call it, for Pierre Dorion. To me, it's still that way. Like, sign him, don't sign him. Like, I don't know, man.
Well, and it's not like trading DeBrincat automatically makes it a bad thing for Dorian. He still has the potential to get better assets than we even expected. I mean, like if he trades for the ninth overall pick from Detroit and some prospect, and people are, at the time of the trade would be like, "Oh my God, this is so underwhelming. The Sens just got so much worse," right? But then at the draft, he flips the ninth overall pick for Travis Konechny. Well, now I mean, Dorian's made up for it, right? Like that's just an example of how you can kind of flip this into a good thing if it ends up happening. Um, I, I don't know. I mean, on the trade thing, like I would give up DeBrincat plus for Saros. Like if we go back to that, I would literally give up more than DeBrincat to get UC Saros here. What you said about the 5v5 scoring, it's true because Ottawa was 24th in the league for 5v5 goals per 60 at 2.4, which is just like at the bottom with all of the bad teams, pretty much except for Minnesota. That has to be better. Again, I just think, and I know it's a gamble, but if either one of Norris or DeBrincat can score a lot at 5v5, I think you're winning. Like, I think it's still a success. We talked about that before, how like, even if DeBrincat's not the one scoring 40 goals, if Norris is scoring 35 and DeBrincat's scoring 30, and like a lot of those are at 5v5, which I think they would be, I think that could be a pretty dominant line. And if it's not working, then give me Timmy with DeBrincat. Like, I've been asking, give me Timmy with DeBrincat. I need to see this happen, right? And we know that Kachuk and Norris work well together. So I just think that if you play these guys and if it's not working, you shuffle it, they have enough skill to overcome, whether it's bad luck, whether it's just a slump, whatever it is. Like, Alex DeBrincat is too skilled to not be an elite goal scorer. Like, he's a really good, he sets himself up so well to score goals and to get in position. And if even half those posts went in this season, we're probably not even talking about this right now. And that is like inches, right? So I don't know. For me, I think you got to sign DeBrincat if he's willing to stay. And this report just kind of solidifies it in my mind that, like, if there's even an opening and the deal isn't UC Saros or somebody that's really going to help your team, don't trade him. Just take him to Arb. Like, get him at under 8 million this year and just keep him. Like, take him to the deadline. He'll probably reconsider. I mean, if he's here, the longer he's here, who knows? Maybe if it's a family thing, they get more settled or whatever happens. I know the guys are trying to convince him to stay. That was reported as well. So, maybe he loves the vibes. They're a playoff team next year and he ends up re-signing, right? It's very likely. Like, it's a very likely scenario or a realistic scenario. Um, I'd be really upset if they trade him for something bad and then go out and they say, like, yeah, Andrew Kopp is going to replace him next year and we signed Jonas Corposalo in free agency and now we're a better team. That's just not true. They wouldn't be a better team in that scenario. And again, it comes back to pro scouting with the trades, which makes me nervous. So I'm almost on board now with either sign him now long term. If he doesn't want to, keep him unless UC Saros is on the table. Like, that's basically what I'm on board with now.
And that kind of goes back to what I said, right? Like, I tweeted this too. I tweeted a lot of stuff. We both did. Like, it was a bit of it was a storm on Wednesday, right? But I tweeted that I have trust in Pierre Dorion for this move and this transaction, whatever it is, the contract especially, but even a trade, like I mentioned, this is going to be career defining for Pierre Dorion, I think, and he knows that. He knows that he put himself out there for this player. I guess also with Jacob Chikrin, but that's a bit different. He had term, and the defense was a whole other issue. It was a position of weakness that they've now strengthened. And now I wouldn't say losing DeBrincat makes the forwards a weakness. It just makes them less strong, obviously, weaker, let's say. But you have to be able to I guess understand all of this, right? You have to understand the implications of a trade if you're Dorion, and I think he does. Is what my point is. Like, I have faith that he understands that getting two roster players that are both probably won't both equal up to the value that DeBrincat could bring. Now, again, this Steve Warren article has changed my perception of DeBrincat a lot, because if he was not happy being here, didn't see a fit on the roster, which was another reported or speculated thing from a insider, that would have been a whole other discussion, because I could go off about him not wanting to be here because of his fit on the team. I think that would be ridiculous, because personally, I don't think it's hard to say deserved, because it's obviously up to a coach to get the best line combinations. But I mentioned Claude Giroux, who didn't play top power play unit, played on the top line, but you can't demote Giroux, like demote in quotations. You can't demote Giroux just because you want DeBrincat to be happy. Like that's not how it's going to work. It's not how teams win. And I'm glad to hear that DeBrincat actually likes DJ Smith. What are your thoughts on that? Because I know you've been big on the, if they got a new coach, he'd stay right away. And that was actually one of my questions, was if getting rid of DJ made Kachuk and Stutzel, who vouched for him at the end of the year, it made them disgruntled, but it kept DeBrincat, would you have done it? I think I'm still going to ask that. Like, regardless of what Steve Warren reported, if DeBrincat was going to stay, if DJ was gone, but Kachuk and Stutzel would have been up in arms about it, would you do it if you're Pierre Dorion?
Yep. Yeah, I don't even need to think about it, because I don't think they would be that disgruntled. Like, I know Brady and Tim have spoken highly of DJ, and again, he's the only coach they've played under at the NHL level. So it's a little different, because when you watch Giroux and DeBrincat and these other veterans that come in, they're not going to talk bad about DJ, but they clearly aren't super content as the young guys are, and there's kind of, you can see the difference between them. I still think like Brady and Tim are smart enough, and good enough competitors to understand that maybe they could get a more proven coach or somebody who could actually come in and take advantage. Like, I know the excuse or the valid reasoning, I guess, is that Tim scored 90 points in the system, so DeBrincat scoring less, it doesn't like matter because this is, if Tim can do it, anybody can do it. I think Tim's just like a legitimately top 30 player in the NHL already, and I think he can just overcome any system because he's that good and that dominant with the puck. Um, I don't know. I still feel like, yes, I would get rid of DJ. I think, and I do still think that that is a factor with DeBrincat. Just, I don't know, reading between the lines of what DeBrincat said this year, it really sounded like he was sort of, I don't know if unhappy is the word, but disappointed maybe by the way that he was used, in the sense that he set a new career high in hits because he was forechecking so much. And he, I don't know, his durability is a thing, obviously, and that comes into effect too. I just think DJ is on the verge of losing his job anyway. Like, I think new owners, I'd be really surprised if they don't replace DJ within the next year. Even if they make the playoffs, I don't know. I have a hard time seeing DJ as the long-term guy here. And I think that, I mean, that is an interesting quote. I was just reading it actually again. He said he likes the coach a lot. That's kind of bizarre, but I mean, if DJ, I mean, even with the system, DJ is a very positive guy. He's a very good communicator. He's someone who connects with the players. So DeBrincat, maybe we've been reading it wrong all along, and maybe he doesn't love the system, but he likes DJ a lot, and that typically is what happens. And maybe that's more important to him. Like, maybe winning isn't the only thing in his mind. Maybe he just wants to be in a good situation where he's happy, right? We really don't know what he's thinking. But like, this whole report, man, like, I'm just reading it again, and what's curious is why the Senators require an answer from DeBrincat by draft day this month. Somewhere along the way, it feels like it's more from a preference into a deadline and doesn't necessarily need to be. Like, that basically says this deadline is being fabricated. Like, why do we even need to know by draft day? Just let DeBrincat sit on it, and I mean, sign him to a 1-year deal. You could still trade him and whatever else, right? It doesn't really matter. There doesn't need to be a deadline here. So I think we can all take a step back. I feel a little bit better after reading this article because I was getting pretty frustrated. Not even that he was going to be traded. It's just, I hate how when this comes up, people start bashing him and start saying like he's not that valuable. Like, he is. He's really good. He is really good. So in my mind, it's simple. Keep good players. I think, like I said, you can fit the entire core under contract. And you can balance the lineup. Like, if Florida can have Nick Cousins playing on their second line, we can have Matthew Joseph playing on our second line. And that's kind of what I'm saying, is you can fit it all and you can build a really good roster, and star power is more important than is credited for, I think, in today's game.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, the cap is expected, and I say expected very heavily because we don't know. It's expected to go up by 5 or 6 million from what it will be next season, which is significant. That is raises for whoever needs new contracts by 2-3 million. That's another player if everyone's locked up, which they should be. That's Jake Sanderson making his money without being worried about it. There's so many things that factor into it, but I will say after next season, when the cap goes up, let's say next summer is when you get DeBrincat signed when he's a UFA. Then you're 2 years from Batherson being a UFA. Like, it's quick. Like, things happen fast, which is why playoffs have to happen. I agree. I've been on the 1-year train for DeBrincat for a long time. And if this report has any validity to it, I don't think a trade's going to happen. I don't think, unless I think what's happening
Let's see, it's an
is
offer, like a really good
that's
offer.
the thing.
That's it.
It's got to be one that blows their doors off. This isn't a deadline situation like Mark Stone. This isn't a we need to rebuild. We need to get this guy out of here like Erik Karlsson. This is quite honestly just a player who needs a new contract, who seems to like it here, fits in with your core, age wise, play wise, everything. That if you get your doors blown off after he had a down season, then you take it. But you can't. I don't think at this point you can take anything less than what you traded for him. Like, if Detroit comes knocking and says, hey, we'll give you 9th overall, 39th, 37th, whatever the Sens gave up, and then a 4th rounder in 2 years, then you maybe consider it if you're not sure, if you get cold feet about his contract. But again, you don't need to wait, like, or you can wait. I mean, you don't need to do it right now. So quickly, because we're going for a while here with DeBrincat, lots of stuff to talk about with him, and we appreciate everyone who's stuck around, who's joined and come back and everything. We will discuss quickly the ownership because we did get news on that today as well. We are now down to 2 bids reportedly. Steve Apostolopoulos is out, and he was the front runner. So that kind of throws a wrench in things. And it seems like Nico Sparks is also out, who may have been out already. I don't know. We've done a good job of steering clear of ownership stuff for the last week because it's just been ridiculous. But it seems like it's the Kimmels and the Andlauer who are left, who are kind of our two guys anyway, or our two groups that we were interested in and we knew the most about them. If it's those two, it's a win-win for me. I don't know. Like how are you? I know you're Team Kimmel officially, but like when I was too, but when Dubas was gone, I was like, you know what? I don't care anymore. Just someone do it officially here. So what's your thinking about this coming out now? I guess on a Friday, almost a month after bids were due.
Well, I think I'm happy with either bid now. I mean, I wrote a whole article about Andlauer when we thought he was gonna win the bid there, however long ago that was. It feels like a year ago now. And
Well,
he, I
we're
think,
sitting on we got a pod also sitting there
oh
just
yeah,
with
we
Michael
filmed a whole
Andlauer.
pod. We filmed
Forgot
like a
about that one.
25-minute pod about
So
Andlauer, and
we're
we
Team
haven't
Andlauer for the clicks. We're team Andlauer.
exactly. Yeah, but I mean, I like Andlauer a lot. I think the Melnick comparisons are a little irrational. I think he brings a lot of like the quote that I saw was he's just a passionate hockey fan with a lot of money who wants to win. Like he wants to win a championship and build a winner. And I think he would have really good intentions for the Sens. Like I'd be happy with him. I will agree that he's a little less exciting than the Kimmels, just because the Kimmels have this robust plan of modern thinking, and they're very young and proactive with like the way that they think. And I love that because I love analytics and I love that they would implement that and expand the front office departments. I think that's arguably the number one priority this summer. Off the ice anyway. I'm fine with either group. I think the bigger thing to take from this is that like the top bidder who had over $1 billion bid on this walked away because he was so frustrated with the sale process. And it's just kind of a testament to how brutal this has been. And it frustrates me that Gary Bettman came out 2 weeks ago or something, and his quote was, this is all going according to plan and we're very happy with how it's gone, and they're doing a great job over there at the bank. And it's like, Gary, you're just speaking now. Like you're just saying words and you're not even thinking, because that's completely false. You've got a $1 billion plus bid just off the table. Not that I really wanted him to win anyways. I'm just saying like that's a lot of money. And they're probably going to sell for less now, which is fine with me. But for the Melnicks and for everybody involved, they just probably lost a decent bit of money based on how long this has been going. So I don't even know what the holdup is at this point. I know there's been conflicting reports, but at like you have two parties here. You have two parties and you know who each is. I think they just have to pick. Like, just pick, man. We know what the money's going to be. Just pick a party and let's get this going, because the Sens have a lot of things to resolve. And if DeBrincat, I know it sounds like a cop out, but if DeBrincat is truly waiting on this ownership thing and wants to like see what their plan is, which is reasonable if that's true, because it's 8 years of his life and his entire prime. Like he wants to know he's not going to be on a disaster of a team or an organization, right? Which the Sens have been the last few years. So I'm sure he had his thoughts before coming to Ottawa, before the ownership thing was changing about the team, because everybody did. Like they were a mess the last few years. But like if that's true and he's waiting on the ownership thing, get this sorted. Like if we trade Alex DeBrincat because of this ownership thing, I'm gonna be some angry. Like if that has any factor, that's absurd to me. It already affected the off ice stuff by missing out on not only Dubas, but a lot of coaches have been hired, a lot of GMs, like a lot of good candidates have already been taken off the market. And if they ever plan to replace DJ this summer or Pierre, like the opportunity is fading. There's not as many options now just because of this delay. So to me, get this done. Like, let's get DeBrincat signed if he's willing to stay. Like, it all comes back to ownership, and it's been kind of a damper on the whole summer. Like, it's unfortunate that we're here, and it's really just gone downhill since Reynolds.
I agree. Yeah, that was the spur in the wheel or whatever, the spur in the wheel. Like, John Rodenberg from TSN tweeted just a message about Andlauer. We'll wrap up on this. There wasn't much on the Kimmels today after all that came out, but he said a message from someone connected to Andlauer, connected to the Sens sale about Andlauer. He's a reasonable guy, nothing fancy, just wants to buy a team and win the cup. Same, man. I just want to win a cup. Like, I like that. Simplicity, minimalist, whatever you want to call it. I'm good with that. But again, I'm also good with the Kimmels. This isn't news really. Like, I think Apostolopoulos was shiny because of the money, but at the end of the day, you got to make smart decisions with that money, and there was no guarantee that was going to happen. I know Nick Kyprios was linked to that, and I like his show. I like his radio show. I don't know how he would be in a front office. It would be a bit of an unknown, a bit of a question mark. So We will see. We'll wrap up on that. I think this has been a great live. Obviously, we had a lot to talk about with Alex DeBrincat. This is why we decided to go live. We'll definitely do it again this summer. Just, I don't know, free agency, draft, like you name it. So thank you again to everyone who joined us today on Friday. And we will see everyone on Monday for the next episode of the Everyday Sens podcast. Like, comment, and subscribe on the YouTube page. Subscribe to everydaysens.com for in-depth analysis on articles and everything like that. I know Brennan's got a bunch of pieces up on DeBrincat, on trade partners, on anything. So thanks everyone for joining, and we will see you guys next time.